This is Beth Helvey in Sarasota, Florida with Compass Real Estate, and we are going to talk about the NAR settlement. If you have spent any time in the media, in social media, the news, and you've seen anything about the settlement, it will then start flooding your social media feed. So a couple things I want to go over with you. The two main points that NAR did when they did this settlement was that the MLS will no longer post the buyer broker compensation. So before, in the realtor remarks, realtors would see how much they were going to get paid for selling that house if they sold it as a buyer. It's not saying that the seller cannot offer buyer broker compensation, because NAR cannot tell a seller or a buyer what they can or cannot pay, and all commissions are negotiable. But they can say it's no longer going to be an MLS. So the other thing that they're doing is that every buyer must sign a buyer broker agreement before seeing a single house. Personally, I think that is eliminating some of the transparency. About 2, maybe 3 years ago, IDX suddenly was able to feed the buyer broker compensation to third-party sites, which is Zillow, Realtor.com, etc. So in the states where a buyer had to sign a buyer broker agreement, they could look on these third-party sites if they wanted to and see what was being offered to their buyer agent, and depending on what their buyer broker agreement said, decide if they wanted to see that house or not. They had that autonomy. They're no longer going to have that autonomy. What we're going to have to do is that the buyer agent is now going to have to call listing agent to find out what the compensation is. We're allowed to do that, we think, but it will not be posted. What we're trying to avoid is the buyer finding out after we go under contract, or worse yet, at the closing table, what they owe their buyer agent. We're trying to make sure that doesn't happen. Couple of things to be aware of. You're going to see a lot of things in the media that says that this is going to bring down prices. It's not. I can promise you that every single seller in the United States, whatever they're selling their house for at market value, they are not going to drop the price by that 2.5%, 3%, whatever the percentage is that they would have paid. They're not going to drop their house by that price. They're going to pocket the rest of that money. I promise you that. It's not going to bring pricing down. A couple things is that another thing that the media likes to say is that the standard that NAR makes realtors take is no longer going to be there. And that's also not true. So NAR cannot tell us how much we can or cannot charge. If I want to work for free, NAR is going to go, that's fine. If I want to sell a house for 20%, NAR is going to go, if you can get it, go right ahead. They don't care. All they care is about how we disclose that information to sellers and buyers. They don't care what we charge. Therefore, they cannot regulate what we charge. I have seen everything from 0 to 4.5% in MLS for a buyer agent. I've seen everything now. Now, I don't know what the seller is paying their listing agent, and I don't ever know that until I get to the closing table and I see it on the closing statement. So I have no idea what that seller is getting paid, what that seller is paying their listing agent until I get to the closing table. So just randomly looking through listings, all I know is what the buyer agent is getting paid. I have no idea what the listing agent is getting paid. And that's all over the place as well. So it's not going to bring down prices, that's for sure. And we don't get 6%. NAR does not regulate what we do or do not get. NAR just tells us how we have to disclose that information and regulates that that information is in fact disclosed, which is actually part of how this lawsuit got started. But that'll be another video. Now, what we're going to do, I think, is that in order to protect the buyers, buyer agents are going to have to spend some time on the phone calling listing agents. If I'm taking you out to go show you 10 properties, I'm going to be making 10 phone calls, and I'm going to ask every listing agent, what are you offering, if anything, for buyer broker compensation? I will take that back to my buyer, and if it is less than the buyer and I agreed on, then it will be up to the buyer to decide whether or not they want to see the house. I mean, that's really all we can do at this point. Until this kind of flushes out and the new mode of selling properties settles down, this is probably what we're going to have to do to get started. A lot of people are saying that that's fine. They're just going to go directly to the listing agent. And I really want to speak on that, because if you go directly to the listing agent, they are working for the seller. They're not working for you. They will do the paperwork. They will probably answer a few generic questions. But I know if you come to me as a listing agent and you're not represented, my job is to work for my seller. My job is to get my seller the best result possible, which means that I'm not going to advise you on what you should do about repairs. I'm not going to advise you on what you should do about permits. I'm not going to advise you about which contract you should actually use, because we have 2 contracts here in the state of Florida. I'm not going to advise you on which inspections you should or shouldn't have. I'm not going to advise you on how to fill out that contract in your best interest. I will answer your questions, but I can't advise you. I am not working for you. I am contracted to the seller. The other thing is that there is a possibility that with this new NAR settlement, that you as the buyer who comes to me as the listing agent are going to have to sign some kind of buyer broker agreement with me. What we don't know is what that will look like. Can I sign a one-time showing agreement with you and just get you into the house, get your questions answered, whatever, and then send you on your way, or then work up a contract with you? Or do I have to sign you now as my buyer? Am I now representing you going forward? We don't know that. We don't know the ins and outs of what the buyer broker agreement is going to look like, and what, if anything, NAR is going to tell us as to how we handle this going forward. We still don't have that information. So I would be really careful about that. Now, you can go directly to the listing agent. I mean, I know with every listing I have, I show it to unrepresented buyers every time. And I have done it. Now, granted, most of those buyers don't actually buy the property. I've had a few, but most of them don't. They're not prepared to buy the property in a lot of ways, especially when they start asking me questions about how the contract is going to get structured, how they would pay for it, things like that. They're typically not prepared. They're not in a position yet to be able to make an offer on the property. So if you do go to listing agent, you're going to get 3 types of agents. You're going to get an agent who is quite possibly going to steer you in the wrong direction purposefully. We all know that there's bad apples in every profession, and with realtors it's no different. You're also going to get the neutral agent, which is what I am. I will do what I have to do to get the transaction to the closing line, which is to closing. I will answer your questions, but I'm not going to advise you. I will remain neutral as far as that goes. And in that case, every single time, usually the seller has the advantage because of that. You're also possibly going to get an agent who is going to work super hard for you, like as if they're a dual agent, and they're going to work for you and they're going to work for the seller, and you honestly don't know that. Now, another thing with this NAR agreement is I'm going to have to get permission from my seller to work with you. So if my seller says, listen, Beth, I'm not comfortable with you talking to this buyer and representing me, I'm just not comfortable in that situation, then I can't do it if my seller says no. That's something else to consider. There's a lot of nuances of this that still have to be fleshed out. So there are people also saying, that's fine, I'll just go to a lawyer. You can. A lawyer is going to charge you $500, $600 to do title. But that's just to do title. You're going to get charged differently if you want them to represent you, if you want them to write up the agreement, if you want them to write the contract, if you want them to go through the addenda. They're not going to open any doors for you. And don't forget, you're going to have to sign a buyer broker agreement with the listing agent in order to get that door opened. And then you're going to pay your attorney. Attorney's not going to negotiate for you unless you pay them. And that's going to be their hourly rate, which is $400 to $600 an hour to negotiate. At that point, then you're talking to an attorney who is going to charge you for phone calls, emails, texts, etc. You're also not going to have the kind of access to them that you would to a realtor. So if you decide to go that direction, make sure you look at all the possibilities and make sure you have that conversation with the attorney and find out what that attorney will and will not do for you, so that you are aware going into that transaction. Just make sure you have that conversation with that attorney. Now, here's what I think is going to happen. Now, in Southwest Florida, if you watch the video previous to this, I talked about the market, and I talked about how in the condo and townhome world, we have 6.5 months of inventory, and in the single family home world, we have almost 5 months of inventory, which means we're nearly at a balanced market. What I personally think is going to happen is I think sellers are still going to offer a buyer broker compensation. And this is why. Because we have enough property on the market that if they don't offer a buyer broker compensation, that buyer starting in July, August, is not going to want to pay their realtor. So what they'll do, unless they absolutely positively fall in love with that house, they're going to go to another property. And I think that's what's going to happen to start with until we evolve and morph into whatever the new situation is going to be with buyers and sellers being represented. I think that's what's going to happen. So I don't think we're going to see a lot of sellers not offering some kind of buyer broker compensation to start with. I think it's going to take a while to catch up. And I certainly think that if interest rates drop and sellers become the ones in power and housing prices go up, we have buyers entering the market, inventory goes down, at that point they may stop offering it. Okay, so just be aware of this. Keep ahead of the market, keep your eye on the market. If you are a buyer entering the market in the Sarasota, Florida area anytime soon, there are some possibilities that whether or not you pay your buyer agent is going to change with interest rates, with the market, with inventory, and with what is going on in our area. So I'm going to post more in the comments, so feel free to read it and feel free to ask me any questions. This is Beth Helvey in Sarasota, Florida with Compass Real Estate. Good luck out there.